he chose to hope in God. Hoping in God is a choice, and Simeon made it. Before we go through the elements of Simeon's song, which is a little further in the passage, step back and think about his life with me. Now, Simeon was old, and the text does not indicate his age. But it's very interesting that he is kind of wandering around, and he's not a little kid, and also the corresponding very aged Anna, which follows him, and with the tense of how long he's been waiting, and he says, I'm ready to die, all those would be clues that he's probably old. So if Simeon was old, although the text doesn't say it, but it's implied, Simeon must have had much to ponder. There were all the disappointments in his life that he could choose to relive and feel the painful sting over and over again. Have you ever met people like that? It's like they have this choice that they dredge up and relive every painful event in their life. And it's almost what they feed themselves on. And Simeon chose to not do that. And then there were the daily needs he could choose to worry over, especially if he was getting elderly and old. It was harder and harder to make it through each day. And then all the injustices of life around him, he could choose to bemoan. I mean, Israel was an occupied nation with a tyrannical Roman oppression all around them, and he could have just spent his life bemoaning the state of the world, or anxious about all of his needs, or reliving every pain in his life. Now, we all know people like that. He wasn't like that. And of course, if he was elderly, he could choose to dredge up many things in the past that he regretted, and constantly just living in the past. But Simeon chose not to dwell on all the bumps that jolted him on the rough ride of life. Instead, God's word notes that Simeon had made it a habit in his life to look at God's plans for his future. Did you know that's what Simeon focused on? Not on all the bumps, not on all the pains, but on what God had planned for his future. And it wasn't just in the back of his mind, it was in the front. Because it came out as soon as he had this exciting moment, what was really important to him comes out. And it was God's plans for his future. God's plans for his future with brightness and hope. The secret of Simeon's walk in those many little choices made by faith was that he chose to live in hope. Hope led him to love the Lord more and more. See, if you really believe that's where you're going, to dwell in the house of the Lord forever, you just think about that so much that you love him and hope more and think more, and it's just like the endless growing anticipation of that moment, of being welcomed into the place we long to be, in the house of the Lord forever, as the 23rd Psalm says it. He had such love for the Lord, and that love always pours out in worship and expectation for God. Thus, we can see from the verses before us that worship and praise were natural for Simeon because God was at the center of his life. Now, I want you to think about what that means. God was at the center of his life. So what's the lesson from Exodus? God wanted everybody to know that he's in the center of everything. He's the one that lit their way. He's the one that protected them. He's the one that provided for them. He was the one that led them, because that what would become a big cloud during the day, which would shield them from the 120-degree Sinai blazing desert that would have given them all skin cancer and heat stroke, God put this mobile umbrella over the whole 81 square mile group. And they just everybody knew where they were. All the bad guys knew where they were, because at night there was this giant pillar of fire. Can you imagine the nomads saying, "Whoa, those 3 million people are over there." And during the day, they had this parasol over them. I mean, what a representation of God. But it all centered on that tent. And you know what the book of Leviticus is about? How to get to know the God in the tent. That's what the whole book is about. And it says, God spoke to Moses from out of the tent and said, if anybody wants to come to me, this is how you come. That's the whole book of Leviticus. 27 chapters of what it means for God to be the center of your life. Well, Simeon had mastered that. Simeon's choice was to have God at the center of his life. And as you hold God's word in your hands, let this truth overflow into your mind, your heart, and your life, that nothing is as bleak as the life of an unbeliever. They must live only for today because they have no firm hope in God's promises of a glorious tomorrow. That's why they live only for the moment. That's why all the people that are filling the media, the Hollywood, the social scene, and everything else are so in your face, because that's all they have to live for is this moment. And we don't. We have the future. With the promises of God to cling to every day, we have hope and good cheer. As believers, we know the truth of the Scriptures say that nothing can separate us from God's love, neither old age nor grim circumstances. Remember today, nothing but your own wrong choices can keep you from God's comforting hope. God is sufficient for our needs today and forever. Allow God's Spirit to use Simeon's example to energize you to look ahead to God's great plan for every day. Choose to live in hope one day at a time, like Simeon.